I never imagined that a family dinner would become the moment everything unraveled. My sister Serafina smiled sweetly as she pointed toward the kitchen counter, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe you should eat over there tonight, Evangeline. The dining room is really for people who contribute to this household." The entire family watched in silence as she handed me a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, my hands trembled. It was not just a dinner bill. It was an itemized invoice for 23 years of supposedly borrowed money that I had never borrowed from a trust fund I never knew existed. Before we dive into this shocking story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I would love to know where you are watching from. Are you Team Justice or Team Forgiveness when it comes to family drama? Hit that like button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted most, and do not forget to subscribe, because this story has more twists than a roller coaster. Trust me, you will not want to miss what happens next. The invoice shook in my hands as I stared at line items dating back to my childhood. Piano lessons, $3,000. Summer camp fees, $5,000. College application fees, $1,200. Every expense from my upbringing was listed with compound interest calculated at an astronomical rate. My sister Serafina stood there with her arms crossed, her husband Marcus nodding approvingly beside her, while my parents sat frozen at their own dining table. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The humiliation burned through my chest as I realized our extended family members were witnessing this calculated attack. My cousin Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while my Uncle David cleared his throat awkwardly. "It means," Serafina said with satisfaction, "that Mom and Dad have been keeping track of every penny they spent raising you. Unlike some people, I paid my own way through college and contributed to this household from the day I graduated. You, on the other hand, have been a financial burden for over 2 decades. My mother finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "Serafina, we never discussed presenting it this way. This was supposed to be a private family conversation." "Private?" Serafina laughed harshly. "Nothing about Evangeline has ever been private. She has been living off our family name and resources while contributing absolutely nothing. At least now everyone knows the truth about who the real parasite is in this family." The words hit me like physical blows. I had worked 2 jobs throughout college, graduated summa cum laude, and had been sending money home every month for the past 3 years since landing my marketing position at Morrison Creative Agency. Yet somehow, according to this document, I owed my family over $150,000. "I need to see the documentation for this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Bank statements, receipts, proof that this money actually came from anywhere legitimate." Serafina exchanged a quick glance with Marcus that I almost missed. "Documentation? You think we need to prove anything to you? The fact that you are questioning Mom and Dad's integrity right now just shows how ungrateful you really are." But something about that glance bothered me. There was a flicker of panic in her eyes before the mask of righteous indignation slipped back into place. I had seen that look before. In high school, when she got caught cheating on her SATs, and again in college when she lied about her sorority hazing incident. "I am not questioning anyone's integrity," I replied carefully. "I just want to understand how these numbers were calculated and where the money actually came from. If I truly owe this amount, then I need to understand the source so I can create a reasonable payment plan." My father, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "The source is not really important right now, Evangeline. What matters is that we have provided for you throughout your life, and your sister feels that some acknowledgement of that support would be appropriate." "Some acknowledgement," I repeated incredulously. "This is not acknowledgement. This is a bill for being raised by my own parents. Since when do families charge their children for basic necessities like food and shelter?" since some children never learn to appreciate what they have been given, Serafina snapped. Look around you, Evangeline. This house, this lifestyle, the opportunities you had, none of it was free. Someone had to pay for all of this, and it certainly was not you. I looked around the dining room, where I had eaten thousands of meals, celebrated countless birthdays and holidays, brought home report cards, and shared dreams about my future. The mahogany table that seated 12 people, the crystal chandelier overhead, the oil paintings on the walls. Everything suddenly felt foreign and cold. I contribute $1,500 every month to this household, I said quietly. I have been doing that for 3 years. I also paid for all my own textbooks, school supplies, and living expenses during college after my sophomore year. I worked at Morrison Creative Agency as an intern for free for 6 months before they hired me full-time. $1,500 a month is hardly enough to cover your share of utilities and groceries, Marcus interjected for the first time. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain a house like this? Property taxes alone are more than most people make in a year. I stared at my brother-in-law, wondering when he had become the family spokesperson on my financial obligations. Marcus had only married into our family 2 years ago, yet he seemed remarkably well informed about my supposedly outstanding debt. I think I need to take some time to process this, I said, folding the invoice and putting it in my purse. This is not how I imagined spending tonight. Take all the time you need, Serafina said with false sweetness. But understand that this conversation is not going away. We have been more than patient with your freeloading lifestyle, but patience has its limits. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught my mother's eye. For just a moment, I saw something that looked like regret, or maybe even fear. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, when Serafina shot her a warning look. Walking to my car, I felt like I was leaving behind everything I thought I knew about my family. The invoice in my purse felt like it weighed 50 pounds, and questions swirled through my mind. Where had this money allegedly come from? Why present it this way, in front of extended family? And why did Marcus seem so involved in what should have been a private family matter? The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove directly to the county courthouse. If my family was going to present me with financial documentation, I needed to understand what legal standing it actually had. The clerk in the records department helped me pull property records, tax filings, and any financial documents related to my family name that were part of public record. What I discovered made my stomach turn. The house I had grown up in was not owned by my parents. It was owned by something called the Morrison Family Trust, the same Morrison as Morrison Creative Agency where I worked. The trust had been established 25 years ago with an initial funding of $2.5 million, and the beneficiaries were listed as myself and any future children I might have. I stared at the documents in disbelief. According to these records, I was not just a beneficiary of this trust. I was the primary beneficiary. The money that had supposedly been used to raise me had actually come from a fund that was legally mine. My parents were listed as trustees with the authority to use the principal for my health, education, and welfare until I reached the age of 25. My 25th birthday was next month. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Serafina's sudden interest in my financial obligations, Marcus's involvement in family matters, my parents' obvious discomfort during last night's confrontation. They were all scrambling to create a justification for money they had already spent. I drove straight to Morrison Creative Agency and requested a meeting with the founder, Robert Morrison. As my boss, he knew me well, but I had a feeling our connection ran deeper than just employment. "Evangeline," he said warmly when his assistant showed me into his office. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you here on a Friday? Are you feeling better?" "Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you about a family trust that has your name on it. I know this might seem strange, but I discovered some documents yesterday that suggest my family has been managing money that legally belongs to me." His expression shifted from friendly confusion to serious concern. "Sit down," he said quietly, closing his office door. I have been wondering when this conversation would happen. How much do you know about your adoption? The word hit me like a physical blow. My adoption. Evangeline, your biological father was my younger brother Thomas. He and your mother Sarah died in a car accident when you were 2 years old. My wife Linda and I were overseas at the time, building the foundation for this company. So Thomas had named your mother's sister and her husband as your guardians in his will. We established the trust to ensure you would have everything you needed, with the understanding that when you turned 25, you would learn the truth about your heritage and gain control of your inheritance. I sat in stunned silence as Robert continued. Your parents, well, your adoptive parents, were supposed to use the trust funds only for your direct benefit. They were never supposed to treat it as their personal account. The trust was meant to cover your education, healthcare, and eventually provide you with the foundation to build your own life. How much money are we talking about? I asked, my voice barely audible. The original trust was $2.5 million. With conservative investments over 23 years, it should be worth approximately $4.8 million today. That assumes, of course, that the principal has been properly managed and not excessively depleted. My mind reeled. $4.8 million. Money that belonged to me, managed by people who had just handed me a bill for $150,000 for the privilege of raising me with my own inheritance. There is more, Robert said gently. Thomas also left specific instructions about your employment here. He wanted you to have the opportunity to work in the family business if you chose to do so. Your position here was not just based on your merit, though your work has been exceptional. You are actually entitled to a 20% ownership stake in Morrison Creative Agency when you turn 25. The room spun around me. I was not just an employee at Morrison Creative Agency. I was about to become a partial owner. The invoice Serafina had handed me suddenly seemed even more sinister. They were not just stealing from me. They were trying to make me feel guilty for money that had been mine all along. I need to see the trust documents, I said, my voice growing stronger. All of them, every transaction, every expenditure, every decision that has been made with my money for the past 23 years. Robert nodded grimly. I will have our lawyers pull everything together. Evangeline, I am afraid what you are going to find will not be pretty. Linda and I have been monitoring the situation from a distance, but we did not want to interfere unless there were clear signs of mismanagement. Based on what you are telling me about last night, I think we are well past that point. I left Robert's office with my head spinning and my heart pounding. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. The family that had raised me was not my biological family. The money they had used to provide for me was actually my own inheritance, and the job I thought I had earned through hard work was partially mine by birthright. But more than that, I was starting to understand that Serafina's cruelty was not just sibling rivalry. It was a calculated attempt to make me feel so guilty and worthless that I would never question my family's financial arrangements. She had been systematically undermining my confidence and making me feel like a burden, so that when my 25th birthday arrived, I would be too grateful and too insecure to ask difficult questions about my inheritance. That evening, I sat in my small apartment with a stack of legal documents spread across my kitchen table. Robert's lawyers had worked quickly to compile 23 years of trust documentation, and the picture they painted was devastating. Over $4 million had been withdrawn from my trust, with only the most creative accounting, making it appear that the money had been used for my benefit. A private investigator named Catherine Wells had been recommended by Robert's legal team. She specialized in financial fraud cases and had agreed to meet me that weekend to review the evidence. When she arrived at my apartment Saturday morning, she took one look at the documents and whistled softly. This is one of the most systematic cases of financial abuse I have seen, she said, spreading the papers across my coffee table. Look at this pattern of withdrawals. Large amounts taken out just before major family vacations, home renovations, and purchases that clearly had nothing to do with your care. She pointed to a series of transactions from my teenage years. $50,000 withdrawn the same month your parents bought a new boat. $30,000 taken out when your sister needed a down payment for her first apartment. $75,000 removed just before your parents renovated their master bathroom and bedroom suite. But some of this money actually was used for me, I said, trying to be fair despite my growing anger. My college tuition, my car insurance, medical expenses. Of course, Catherine agreed. That is how this type of fraud works. They use enough of the money for legitimate expenses to create a paper trail, then bury the misappropriated funds in creative accounting sounding. But look at these education expenses more carefully. She pulled out a highlighted document. Your college tuition was $42,000 per year for 4 years. The trust was billed $68,000 per year. Where did that extra $26,000 go each year? I studied the paperwork and felt sick. My sister was in college at the same time. Her tuition was more expensive because she went to a private art school instead of the state university where I went. Exactly. They were using your trust fund to pay for her education while claiming all education expenses were yours. And look at this. She pointed to another set of transactions. Vehicle insurance, vehicle maintenance, vehicle payments, all charged to your trust. But according to DMV records, your family owned 4 cars during your high school years, and you were only the primary driver on one of them. The evidence kept mounting. Medical expenses that included cosmetic procedures for my adoptive mother. Educational supplies that coincided with Marcus's graduate school enrollment. Therapeutic services that turned out to be couples counseling for my parents during a rough patch in their marriage. The worst part, Catherine continued, is this consulting fee arrangement. For the past 5 years, your adoptive parents have been paying themselves a monthly trustee's fee of $4,000 from your trust. That is completely inappropriate given the size of the trust and the minimal management required. So the $1,500 I have been contributing to household expenses, I said slowly, has actually been going into their pockets while they simultaneously paid themselves $4,000 monthly from my own money to manage my affairs. That is exactly right. You have been paying them to steal from you. My phone buzzed with a text from my adoptive mother. Evangeline, we need to talk. Can you come for dinner Sunday? Serafina wants to discuss a payment plan for your debt. I showed the message to Catherine, who laughed bitterly. They are panicking. Your 25th birthday is in 3 weeks, and they know they are running out of time to manipulate you into accepting responsibility for their theft. What do you recommend? We gather more evidence first. I want to interview other family members who might have witnessed financial discussions or decisions. Your cousin Rebecca seemed uncomfortable during the dinner confrontation. People like that sometimes know more than they initially reveal. We also need to document your current living situation and financial contributions to establish that you have been financially independent and responsible. That afternoon, I called Rebecca and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. We had always gotten along well, but I had not spent much individual time with her in recent years. When I explained what I had discovered about my trust fund and adoption, her reaction surprised me. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I was wondering if you would ever find out the truth. My mom has been worried about you for years, but she did not want to interfere in family business. Your mother knows about my adoption. She was your biological mother's best friend. She is the one who recommended your adoptive parents to Uncle Thomas when he was updating his will. Mom has always felt responsible for how things turned out." Rebecca revealed that her mother, my Aunt Patricia, had tried to maintain a relationship with my adoptive parents, specifically to keep an eye on my welfare. Over the years, she had noticed increasingly expensive lifestyle choices that seemed inconsistent with what teachers and social workers typically earn. The renovations, the vacations, the cars. Mom knew it was not adding up. But every time she asked about your trust fund, your parents got defensive and said everything was being managed properly for your future. Did your mother ever try to contact Robert Morrison directly? She did actually about 3 years ago. She was told that as long as there were no formal complaints and you seemed healthy and happy, the company preferred not to interfere with the trustees' decisions. I think they were trying to respect your privacy, but it also meant nobody was really watching what was happening to your money. Rebecca agreed to have her mother document everything she remembered about my biological parents, the circumstances of my adoption, and her concerns about the trust management. She also revealed something that made my blood run cold. Serafina has been asking a lot of questions about your trust lately. She wanted to know if Mom knew anything about what would happen to the money if you died before your 25th birthday, or if you decided you did not want it. What did your mother tell her? That she did not know anything about the legal details, but Serafina seemed really interested in the idea that you might sign the inheritance over to your adoptive parents out of gratitude. She kept saying things like, Evangeline is so naive about money, she probably would not even want the responsibility of managing a large inheritance. The pieces of Serafina's strategy became clearer. The public humiliation at dinner, the itemized bill for my upbringing, the emphasis on my supposed financial irresponsibility, it was all designed to make me feel so guilty and incompetent that I would voluntarily surrender my inheritance to the people who had spent most of it already. Sunday dinner was still scheduled, and both Catherine and Rebecca thought I should attend with a carefully planned strategy. I would let Serafina present her payment plan, ask specific questions about the trust fund and my adoption, and gauge how much they actually knew about my recent discoveries. The goal, Catherine explained, is to gather evidence of their knowledge and intent. If they are aware that you are entitled to this money, and they are still trying to manipulate you into accepting debt for it that moves this from mismanagement into the realm of active fraud. As I prepared for what would likely be my final family dinner, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For 24 years, I had believed that I owed my family everything. Now I understood that they had been the ones indebted to me all along. Sunday dinner arrived with an atmosphere thick enough to cut. I sat at the same dining room table where my humiliation had begun, but this time I was armed with knowledge and legal documentation hidden in my purse. Serafina had prepared what she called a reasonable payment schedule for my supposed debt, complete with monthly installments and interest calculations. "We have been very generous," she announced, sliding a typed document across the table. "Instead of demanding immediate payment, we are willing to accept $500 monthly for the next 30 years. That brings your total obligation to $180,000, which includes a very modest interest rate." I pretended to study the payment plan while internally marveling at her audacity. She was asking me to pay nearly $200,000 for the privilege of being raised with my own money. "This is very detailed," I said carefully. "Can you show me how you calculated the original expenses? I would like to understand what specific costs went into the $150,000 base amount." Marcus and Serafina exchanged another one of those quick glances before she responded. "The specifics are not really important, Evangeline. What matters is that Mom and Dad invested significantly in your future, and some acknowledgement of that investment is appropriate." "But I am curious about the source of the funds they used," I pressed gently. "Did this money come from their savings, or was there some other source they drew from to cover my expenses?" My adoptive mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Well, there was a small trust established when you came to live with us, but that money was always intended for your care and upbringing." "A small trust," I repeated. "Can you tell me more about that?" Before my parents could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's number, which surprised me since she knew I was at dinner. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer. "Evangeline!" Rebecca's voice was urgent and panicked. "I need to tell you something important. Can you talk privately? I am at dinner right now." I said, noting how the entire table had gone silent. This cannot wait. My mother just told me something that changes everything. She has been in contact with someone from your family, and they know you have been investigating the trust. You need to be very careful. My blood ran cold. What do you mean someone from my family has been in contact? Serafina called my mother yesterday. She told Mom that you have been spreading lies about your adoption and trying to access money that does not belong to you. She asked Mom to convince you to stop investigating and to accept the family's financial arrangements. I looked up to find Serafina watching me with a satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. She had been planning this conversation, anticipating that I might have learned something about my background. Worse, she had tried to turn my newly discovered ally against me before I could even present my evidence. Mom also told me, Rebecca continued, that Serafina offered her $10,000 if she could convince you to sign some kind of legal document giving up your claim to any inheritance. She said it would be better for everyone if you just accepted your role in the family and stopped causing drama. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Serafina discovered my investigation, but she had attempted to bribe my relatives to undermine my case. I realized that my adoptive family had been monitoring my activities more closely than I had imagined. I understand, I said into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady while everyone at the table listened. Thank you for letting me know. After hanging up, I looked around the table at faces that suddenly seemed predatory rather than familiar. That was interesting, I said quietly. Rebecca was calling to tell me about a conversation she had with someone in this room. Serafina's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating coldness underneath. Rebecca is a sweet girl, but she has always been easily influenced by gossip and drama. I hope you are not taking her seriously about whatever family nonsense she thinks she heard. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone to record the conversation, she was telling me about a phone call where you offered her $10,000 to convince me to sign away my inheritance rights. The silence that followed was deafening. My adoptive father cleared his throat nervously while my mother stared at her plate as if it might provide answers. Marcus looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding, Serafina said carefully. I may have called Rebecca to express concern about some wild stories you have been telling, but I certainly never offered anyone money for anything. The wild stories about my adoption, I asked. Or the wild stories about the trust fund that has been paying for this lifestyle for the past 23 years. Now my adoptive parents looked genuinely panicked. My mother reached for my father's hand across the table, and I saw them exchange a look that confirmed they knew exactly what I was talking about. Evangeline, my adoptive father said slowly, if you have discovered information about your background, we should discuss it as a family. But making accusations and recording conversations is not the way to handle family matters. Family matters, I repeated. Is that what you call stealing $4.8 million from an orphaned child? Is that what you call charging her for the privilege of being raised with her own inheritance money? The explosion of denials and justifications that followed confirmed everything I needed to know. They were not just aware of the trust. They had been actively planning how to maintain control over it even after my 25th birthday. Serafina's payment plan was not about accountability. It was about creating a legal document that would justify their continued access to my money. But the betrayal that hurt most was learning that they had been monitoring my investigation and attempting to turn my supporters against me. The family dinner where they had publicly humiliated me was not a spontaneous outburst. It was a calculated strategy designed to isolate me and make me doubt my own worth. As the argument escalated around the table, I realized that my adoptive family was not going to admit their wrongdoing or agree to return the stolen money voluntarily. They had invested too much time and effort into this deception to surrender without a fight. I stood up from the table, my legs surprisingly steady despite the emotional turmoil. I think this conversation is over, I said quietly. I will be in touch through my lawyer. Your lawyer? Serafina laughed harshly. What lawyer is going to take on a case like this? You are an ungrateful child making accusations against the people who raised you. No one is going to believe your ridiculous story about stolen money and secret inheritances. I smiled for the first time that evening. We will see about that. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Catherine Wells had been busy over the weekend, and what she discovered exceeded my worst fears about the extent of the financial fraud. I found the smoking gun, she said without preamble. Your adoptive parents have been filing false tax returns for years, claiming trust distributions as their own income and deducting expenses that were never actually incurred. The IRS is going to be very interested in this case. We met at her office where she had assembled a comprehensive timeline of financial misconduct spanning over 2 decades. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Look at this pattern, Catherine explained, spreading documents across her conference table. Every year around tax time, they would withdraw large amounts from your trust, deposit them into their personal accounts, and then report the money as consulting income. They created fake invoices for trustee services, home office expenses, and educational consulting fees that never existed. The tax fraud added a federal dimension to their crimes that made everything more serious. But Catherine had discovered something even more damning in the recent financial records. 3 weeks ago, the day after your confrontation at dinner, your adoptive parents attempted to withdraw the remaining balance from your trust. The only reason they did not succeed is because the bank requires additional documentation for withdrawals over $50,000, and they could not provide legitimate justification for emptying the account. My hands trembled as I processed this information. They had not just been planning to manipulate me into accepting responsibility for their theft. They had been preparing to steal what remained of my inheritance and disappear the evidence entirely. There is more, Catherine continued. I contacted the original law firm that established the trust, and they provided me with documentation that your adoptive parents were specifically instructed about their fiduciary duties. They signed agreements acknowledging that the money was yours and that they were only permitted to use it for your direct benefit. They cannot claim ignorance or misunderstanding. But the most shocking discovery came from an unexpected source. Robert Morrison had been conducting his own investigation, and what he found revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Evangeline, he said when he called that afternoon. I need you to come in immediately. Linda and I have been reviewing old correspondence from your adoptive parents, and we found something that changes everything about this case. At Morrison Creative Agency, Robert and his wife Linda showed me a series of letters dating back over 10 years. The correspondence revealed that my adoptive parents had been systematically lying to Robert about my welfare and my knowledge of the trust. They told us you were struggling academically and socially, Linda explained. They said you had behavioral problems and required expensive therapeutic interventions. They requested additional distributions from the trust multiple times, claiming you needed special tutoring, counseling, and medical care. I stared at the letters in disbelief. The version of me described in these documents bore no resemblance to reality. According to their reports, I was a troubled teenager who required constant supervision and intervention, a young adult who could not hold a job or manage basic responsibilities. Every time we considered reaching out to you directly, Robert continued, your adoptive parents insisted it would be harmful to your emotional development to know about your inheritance before you were ready to handle the responsibility. They convinced us you were too unstable to learn the truth. The manipulation had been even more extensive than I had realized. They had not just stolen my money, they had created an entirely false narrative about my character and capabilities to justify their actions to my biological family. There is something else, Linda said gently. We hired our own investigator to verify their claims about your welfare. We now have evidence that every single report they provided about your problems was fabricated. School records, medical records, employment history. Everything contradicts their assertions about your supposed instability. The investigator they had hired was someone I knew well. My former college advisor, Professor Williams, who had been puzzled by what he called unusual inquiries about my academic and personal history over the years. Professor Williams contacted us after learning about the trust investigation, Robert explained. He said representatives claiming to be family members had been asking inappropriate questions about your grades, your social relationships, and your emotional stability for years. He never understood why your own family would not know these things directly. Professor Williams agreed to testify about the false inquiries and to provide documentation of my actual academic performance, which had been consistently excellent throughout college. He also revealed that someone had attempted to access my academic records without authorization multiple times, and that security had flagged the attempts as potential identity theft. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Tax fraud, trust violations, identity theft, and systematic defamation of character. My adoptive family had committed multiple serious crimes in their effort to steal my inheritance. But the most powerful ally emerged from an unexpected source. Linda Morrison revealed that she had been quietly documenting her concerns about my situation for years, including detailed notes about conversations with my adoptive parents and copies of all financial requests. "I was your biological mother's college roommate," she said, tears in her eyes. "Sarah made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would make sure you were loved and protected. When Thomas asked us to manage the trust, I thought we were honoring that promise by staying out of your daily life. Now I realize we should have been more involved all along." Linda's documentation provided a complete record of every false claim and fraudulent request made by my adoptive parents. More importantly, it showed a clear pattern of escalating deception as my 25th birthday approached. "They knew time was running out," Catherine observed as we reviewed Linda's files. "The correspondence from the past year shows increasing desperation and more elaborate lies about your supposed problems. They were preparing for the moment when you would gain legal control of the trust, and they needed to create justification for why the money was already gone." The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, Marcus, my brother-in-law. Faced with the mounting evidence of serious federal crimes, he had decided to cooperate rather than risk his own prosecution for participation in the conspiracy. "Marcus contacted our office this morning," Catherine reported. "He claims he only recently learned about the extent of the fraud and wants to provide information in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Apparently, Serafina told him they were managing family finances, but he never knew about the trust or the adoption situation." Marcus's testimony revealed that Serafina had been planning the dinner confrontation for months, that she had coached our parents on what to say, and that she had prepared the fabricated bill as part of a strategy to make me feel guilty enough to sign over my inheritance rights voluntarily. Most damaging of all, he admitted that Serafina had shown him bank statements and discussed plans for how they would spend my inheritance once they gained permanent control over it. They had already picked out a vacation home and made plans for extensive renovations to their current house. With federal agencies now involved, my adoptive family's crimes could no longer be dismissed as family disputes or misunderstandings. The evidence was clear, comprehensive, and undeniable. Justice was finally within reach. The final confrontation took place not in a family dining room, but in a federal courthouse where my adoptive parents and Serafina faced charges of tax evasion, trust fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial theft. The same people who had made me feel like a burden for 24 years now sat in handcuffs, finally being held accountable for their decades of deception. The prosecution presented our evidence methodically and thoroughly. Bank records showing millions of dollars in fraudulent withdrawals. Tax returns claiming my inheritance as their personal income. False reports about my character and stability designed to justify their theft. Email correspondence discussing plans to spend money they knew belonged to me. When my adoptive mother took the stand, she finally told the truth about their motivations. "We never intended for it to go this far," she said through tears. "At first, we just used small amounts for things we thought Evangeline would benefit from indirectly. Better food, a nicer house, family vacations that she could enjoy. But as the years went by, our lifestyle became dependent on that money." She explained how Serafina had convinced them that I would never be able to manage a large inheritance responsibly, that I was too naive and trusting to handle the responsibility of wealth. Serafina said we could provide better stability by maintaining control of the trust and giving Evangeline a modest allowance for the rest of her life. The prosecution destroyed this justification by presenting evidence of my actual financial responsibility, academic achievements, and professional success. Professor Williams testified about my academic excellence. My supervisor at Morrison Creative Agency described my work ethic and reliability. My landlord confirmed that I had never missed a rent payment and maintained my apartment impeccably. Serafina's defense strategy collapsed when Marcus's testimony revealed the extent of her manipulation and planning. She had not just participated in the fraud, she had orchestrated much of it, convincing our parents that stealing from me was actually in my best interest. She told me that Evangeline would waste the money, Marcus testified. She said that people who grow up poor do not understand how to handle wealth, and that the family was actually protecting Evangeline by managing the inheritance for her. I believed her because I did not know Evangeline had been financially independent and responsible for years. The judge's sentencing reflected the severity and duration of their crimes. My adoptive father received 3 years in federal prison for tax evasion and trust violations. My adoptive mother received 2 years with the possibility of early release for cooperation with the investigation. Serafina received 5 years for conspiracy fraud and leadership in the criminal enterprise. But the criminal convictions were only the beginning of justice. The civil restitution ordered by the court required them to repay not just the principal amount stolen, but 23 years of lost investment returns and punitive damages for the emotional harm caused by their deception. The final tally was staggering $7.2 million in restitution, plus the immediate return of the remaining trust assets. When combined with Robert Morrison's revelation that I was entitled to 20% ownership in Morrison Creative Agency, my financial situation transformed overnight from struggling young professional to millionaire entrepreneur. More importantly, I discovered that justice extended beyond financial compensation. Linda Morrison had been quietly documenting similar trust abuse cases for years, and our successful prosecution opened the door for other victims to come forward. The law firm that had originally established my trust implemented new oversight procedures to prevent future abuse of vulnerable beneficiaries. Professor Williams used our case as the foundation for research into family financial abuse, leading to new protections for young people whose inheritances are managed by relatives. Marcus's cooperation helped prosecutors identify other cases where family members had manipulated trust arrangements for personal gain. But the greatest victory was personal transformation and the discovery of my real family. Linda and Robert Morrison did not just welcome me into their business, they embraced me as the daughter they had never had. Linda shared memories of my biological parents that helped me understand who I was and where I came from. "Your mother, Sarah, was brilliant and determined," Linda told me as we went through old photographs. "She would be so proud of the woman you have become, especially how you fought for justice when it would have been easier to just accept the lies." I also gained a chosen family among the allies who had helped me seek justice. Catherine Wells became not just my investigator, but a mentor who taught me about standing up for myself and demanding accountability. Professor Williams continued to serve as an advisor, helping me navigate my new role as a business owner and philanthropist. Rebecca and her mother, Patricia, became the family connections I had always craved. People who loved me for who I was, rather than what I could provide for them. Patricia shared stories about my biological parents and helped me understand the family history that had been hidden from me for decades. The most meaningful relationship that emerged was with other survivors of family financial abuse. Through Linda's research network, I connected with dozens of people who had experienced similar betrayals by trusted relatives. We formed a support group that eventually became a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating families about proper trust management and helping victims recover stolen inheritances. My story became a case study taught in law schools and social work programs across the country. Not because the financial fraud was particularly sophisticated, but because it demonstrated how family dynamics can mask serious crimes and how victims can be manipulated into accepting abuse as love. Today, I use my platform and resources to help other people who discover that family members have been stealing from them. The pain of betrayal never completely disappears, but it transforms into something powerful when channeled toward protecting others from similar harm. Looking back on that humiliating family dinner where Serafina handed me a bill for my own upbringing, I understand now that it was actually the moment my real life began. The moment I stopped accepting lies about who I was and what I deserved and started demanding the truth about my own story. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was lying to you about something fundamental? Maybe it was not financial fraud, but we all have moments when we realize that people we love have been manipulating us for their own benefit. How do you think you would handle discovering that your entire family dynamic was built on deception? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced family betrayal, and how did you find the strength to seek justice? Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more true stories about standing up to family manipulation and finding your real worth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people who claim to love them. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family scapegoat to empowered survivor. Remember that you are worthy of honesty, respect, and genuine love, and anyone who tries to make you feel otherwise is telling you more about themselves than about you. Until next time, keep standing up for your truth and never let anyone convince you to accept less than you deserve.